Yesterday, we ended our discussion with food ready to leave the stomach and enter into the small intestine through the pyloric valve. So today we want to start with the small intestine. And the small intestine is where most of the digestion and absorption of food takes place inside of the small intestine. It's quite long. It's hard to imagine that in your abdomen is 23 feet of small intestine, but it's not very big around. It's only about an inch in diameter, probably about as big around as your thumb, maybe. The small intestine actually is divided up into different sections. The very first section the chyme will go through is called the duodenum, or some people call it the duodenum. I call it duodenum. And it's the first section. It receives the chyme as it passes through that pyloric sphincter. And then as the chyme, which is rather acidic, because remember it just came out of the stomach, we had stomach acid, as it passes into the duodenum, it stimulates the intestinal lining to secrete hormones. And these hormones then stimulate, in turn, the pancreas, the gallbladder, and the intestinal lining itself to release enzymes and other materials into the duodenum to start breaking down, or to continue breaking down the food into small particles. The small intestine after the duodenum, the next section is called the jejunum, and you can see it here in the picture where they point to the jejunum. And then the last section of the small intestine is referred to as the ileum. So we have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. But this is where most of the digestion and absorption of the food takes place. Now, inside of the intestine wall are villi, and villi are just as it's are microscopic finger-like structures that line the whole inside of the small intestine, and their job is to absorb the actual food particles. And you can see that the villi, it will increase the surface area because every one of these extensions has a surface, which would be way greater than if the small intestine was just smooth on the inside. So this is going to increase the surface area of the small intestine, and in each of these villi, each of these little extensions that stick up there, you can see that there are small capillaries. That's those red and blue structures inside of each of those pink villi. And then there's also other vessels inside there that really aren't shown here that are called lymph vessels as well. But the whole purpose of the villi is to increase the surface area of the small intestine. If that weren't true, you would have to have a huge small intestine, probably have to carry around in a wheelbarrow in front of you, because it would need to be so large to absorb the necessary nutrients that your body needs. The liver is the largest organ in your body. It's located in the upper right part of the abdomen. Remember, this is the right as in your body, or in this picture, this person is a picture facing us, so his right would be on our left. And it's immediately underneath the diaphragm. So imagine the diaphragm bowing over the top of the intestine, and then as you can see the shadow of the stomach in the diagram. Uh, the blood from all the organs, the stomach and the small intestine, large intestine, they float through the liver sinusoids uh, before they go elsewhere in the body. And the cells in the liver have over 500 functions that are performed by these cells. So it's a very important organ in our body. And the main thing that we're focusing on here is that you're familiar with the function of the liver is in forming bile. And the bile is a greenish fluid that aids in the digestion of fats. But that's just some of the things that the liver does. But the bile itself aids in the digestion of fats. Now, what were those functions of the liver? We said it had over 500 functions. Well, here are some of them. They engulf bacteria and warn red blood cells. They'll take these, like for instance, warn red blood cells and tear them down into the raw materials so that they can those materials can be rebuilt into a brand new red blood cells, or they can engulf bacteria and break them completely down so they're harmless. They're also the liver is also responsible for removing many drugs or poisons that might be in the blood, and it detoxifies, which means to make them not poisonous anymore in our bodies. So that's another thing that it does. It also converts glucose into glycogen. That's one of the ways that our body stores extra glucose that we don't need at the moment, and then stores it. It also can store the extra glucose as fats. So if you have a lot of eat a lot and you have a lot of glucose over a period of time, it will produce a lot more fats. It's also responsible for absorbing amino acids from the blood and using them to manufacture most of the proteins that are found in the blood. So in the blood plasma, the liquid part of our blood, in addition to red blood cells and white blood cells and blood platelets, there are proteins in there that the rest of your body is going to need. And then another function of the liver is that it stores certain vitamins like iron and copper are minerals. So it stores fat-soluble vitamins, and then it also stores some minerals like iron and copper. Now, if just a side note here, fat-soluble vitamins, there's two kinds of vitamins. Some vitamins are water-soluble, and some are fat-soluble. And the liver is responsible for storing the fat-soluble ones. Now, the liver, closely associated with that is the gallbladder, and the gallbladder is kind of like a green sac attached to the liver. It's on the underside of that. When they were dissecting the frog, they pointed out the gallbladder, and it has a bile duct that's attached to it. And the purpose of the gallbladder is to store and concentrate bile. So your liver is producing bile, but it's not needed all the time. You don't eat continuously, so it's just needed at certain points, and so the bile is stored in the gallbladder. So, and then during a meal, when you have eaten a lot of fatty foods, when the fatty material enters the duodenum, the gallbladder contracts and sends the bile into the small intestine. Now, if the bile has been concentrated, or is concentrated in the gallbladder, if that concentration becomes excessive, cholesterol crystals are going to form, and they're going to develop into solids known as gallstones. So if you've ever heard of somebody having gallstones, that's what's happened if the concentration becomes excessive. Concentrating the bile becomes excessive by removing so much water that these crystals of cholesterol form and they develop into a solid. And a lot of these are real tiny, and they can probably just pass through the bile duct, but if they get too large, they can't pass through the duct, and then that becomes a problem, and quite often you have to have surgery to fix that. So notice where in the diagram here we have the green bile duct. It's common bile duct is what it's labeled on the diagram, and it goes from the liver, and then you can see that down on the bottom it exits into the small intestine. Also, the pancreas, as we will see here in a moment, also empties through that same duct. Now, the pancreas is a soft, pinkish white gland. Here they kind of show it yellowish looking, but it's kind of a pinkish white gland. And about 97% of the pancreas cells produce digestive juices that contain enzymes for digesting carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So that's what most of the pancreas does. It produces digestive juices that contain enzymes for digesting those three things right there. It dumps out through the pancreatic duct into the common bile duct. So it branches in there, and you can kind of see in this diagram, here's where it talks about the common bile duct right here, and then there's the pancreatic duct. It's talking about that one. So this pancreatic duct that runs the full length of the pancreas empties into the same place as the common bile duct. One other thing about the pancreas, most of the remaining cells, and so that's only like 3% of the whole pancreas, it produce hormones that are involved in regulating the amount of blood sugar. That's the insulin. So it produces insulin to regulate that. Now, after the food has passed through the entire length of the small intestine, it's going to enter the large intestine. And the large intestine is also known as the colon. And it has three major sections, as you can see in this diagram. You have the part going up, and that's called the ascending colon. Ascend means to go up. Then we have the transverse colon, means it's to go across. It goes from one side of your body to the other side of your body. And then you have the part that descends on the opposite side of the ascending colon, called the descending colon. And then the very last section is kind of S-shaped, and it's called the sigmoid colon. In math, they talk about sigmoid curves, and they're in the shape of an S. The colon is not as long as the small intestine. It's only 5 to 6 feet long. It's about 2.5 inches though in diameter, so it's much bigger around than the small intestine. And material from the small intestine moves first in to the cecum, as you can see right here. And the cecum is just a pouch at the very beginning of the ascending colon. And if you look at this pouch right here, you notice it has this little piece sticking down here, and that is your appendix. The full name of it is called vermiform appendix, and it secretes mucus for the lubrication, and then it harbors certain microorganisms that digest cellulose, sort of like helps to regulate the amount of bacteria that are in your digestive system. It's somehow also believed to function in immunity. Part of your immune system is regulated by that. Now, should that little tube here, that it's a blind tube, which means it's closed on one end and opened into the cecum, should an infection build up in there, then you could have appendicitis, and they'll try to use antibiotics to remedy that. If that becomes a chronic problem, then they may have to remove that. Now, what are the main functions of the large intestine? They're just two primary functions. The major function of the large intestine is to remove waste from your body. So it's going to store the waste, the parts that your body hasn't been able to use, the solid pieces, are going to concentrate in that part of the large intestine, and then it would still be very runny. So the second thing that it does is it reabsorbs water. So a large portion of all the water from the digestive juices and the water you drank and all those things like that is reabsorbed into your body. And if that didn't do its job, then you would have to drink an awful lot more liquid to keep your body hydrated. But your body is very great at reabsorbing the water, recycling the water, and reusing it again. So that takes us to the very end of our digestive system. After the sigmoid colon then is just going to exit the contents out through the anus. So that takes